David sat alone in his posh condo. Looking through the huge window was the condo's own private garden. This was a place he had tried to make a home, but it never quite felt like his own. The condo had been purchased mostly by his parents, the down payment at least. He'd wanted to live close by his parents, partly out of goodwill, to maintain an illusionary image of a cordial relationship with his parents for the sake of his marriage. Sophie, his ex-wife, had been an air stewardess, stunning with a model-like physique, but emotionally distant. Raised in a single-parent home and traumatized by her own parents' constant arguments before their divorce when she was 8, Sophie had always been devoted but never fully present. David could still recall their last big argument, the one that ended everything. Sophie had packed her bags and left, telling him she couldn't stand the constant fighting. What she never understood, though, was that it wasn't their arguments that had broken her. It was his parents. They had been quietly, relentlessly gaslighting and mentally controlling David for years, undermining his confidence and making it impossible for him to live without their controlling influence. Sophie had fallen victim to it too, never seeing through the manipulations, and in the end, she couldn't handle the tension. Now, alone in the posh condo that symbolized his parents' control, David was determined to change his life. He had been ignoring the mounting physical symptoms of his own stress and misery, mainly the severe bloating that plagued him daily. He didn't trust doctors, not after being raised by two narcissistic ones. He was sure his parents' opinions had seeped into every aspect of his life, even his health. After hours of scouring the internet, David self-diagnosed H. pylori, a bacterial infection likely causing his stomach issues. He knew he needed treatment, but couldn't bear the thought of more gaslighting from the medical field. David had spent years under the oppressive shadow of his parents, both doctors with an iron grip on his life. They dictated every aspect of his existence, his career path, his relationships, even his health. His mother, coldly calculating, had long manipulated him with guilt, shame, and the threat of their disapproval. His father, equally controlling, masked his narcissism behind the veneer of medical authority, insisting that David's issues were never serious enough to warrant attention. David's physical health had been deteriorating for months. Bloating, nausea, and persistent discomfort had become his constant companions. But in the toxic cocoon of his parents' control, he had come to believe there was no way out. His mother dismissed his symptoms as stress, and his father was quick to belittle him for being too weak. Any attempt David made to seek real medical help was shot down. The constant gaslighting left him paralyzed, feeling powerless to make decisions for himself. And then there was the voice in the back of his mind, whispering dark thoughts. Maybe it's something worse. Cancer. Maybe this pain is your escape. He fantasized about his own death, imagining how he would be free from the suffocating control. He even began to plan his funeral in his mind, picturing how his parents would react. The idea of death felt like his only way out, a tragic but final rebellion. But more than his physical health, David realized he needed to reclaim his mental freedom. The final push came when he met Tracy, another stunning girl with model physique. She was different from anyone he had ever known. Warm, kind, and full of life. The only child, heiress of her family's middle-size but successful freight forwarder business that's worth multi-millions. Her family company was David's freight forwarder of his small export-import company. They had met in her family company's annual gala dinner party. She saw something in David that he had long forgotten existed, potential. They weren't in a relationship yet, but the possibility of love felt like a second chance. Tracy was warm, perceptive, and she understood the burdens of his life in a way his ex-wife never could. She reignited something in him, a desire to break free, not just survive. So he made the decision. He was going to visit her. She lived in a neighboring country, far enough from his parents, and he needed the distance. Before he left, he indulged in small victories for himself. He bought the VR set he had always wanted and began to write a movie screenplay, something he had dreamed of doing for years, but had never allowed himself the freedom to pursue. And for the first time in years, he started reaching out to friends he had pushed away. It was the first time he'd chosen to do things for himself, not because his parents wanted him to, not because of guilt or obligation. These were his choices. And as for the industrial machine, the business venture he had been working on for years, but which his parents had sabotaged with their constant negativity, David was determined to make it a success. As he recently designed the logo for the machine and filed for patents for new parts he invented, he no longer needed their approval. He had everything he needed: clarity, strength, and the will to create a life he could be proud of. The night before his trip, his parents made a surprise visit. They had their ways of knowing what he was up to, always hovering, always intruding. He had important news to tell them, that he was leaving, taking control of his life, but he knew how it would go. As expected, his mother, in her typical fashion, collapsed dramatically, bruising her face in the process. "You can't leave us like this," she wailed, clutching her cheek, the bruise spreading under her eye. "Look what you've done. You want to kill your own mother." David stood there, the familiar guilt creeping up inside him. His father's silent disapproval was palpable in the room. They always made him feel as though he had done something wrong, something unforgivable, even though he hadn't. But this time was different. David knew what was happening. He wasn't the naive child who had to bend to their will anymore. "This isn't my fault," he said, the words coming out with a conviction he hadn't felt in years. "You're trying to manipulate me again. This is why Sophie left. I won't let you do this to me anymore." His mother sobbed louder, and his father just stood there, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "You are breaking your mother's heart again. We only want what's best for you," his father finally said, the words hollow. "No," David replied. "What you want is control. But I'm done." The next morning, David left for the trip. As he boarded the plane, he looked out the window and felt something inside him shift. This was more than just a trip to see Sophie. It was a journey toward reclaiming himself, his independence, his right to live free from the constant manipulation. He didn't feel the old guilt anymore, at least not as strongly. The pain in his stomach hadn't disappeared, but for the first time, he believed it might if he just kept moving forward. As he started taking the antibiotics and the PPIs he bought in shady chemist shop without any doctor's prescription with water given by an air stewardess that resembled Sophie on the plane, he really started to feel much better, both spiritually and physically. He was determined to fix his life, to pursue love again, to be with Tracy, not out of obligation or guilt, but because it was what he wanted. And as the plane ascended into the clouds, he felt lighter, as if the weight of his parents' control was finally lifting. At the same time as the antibiotics and the PPIs were floating inside his bloodstreams doing their magics. For the first time in a long time, David wasn't just surviving, he felt things were going to be all right this time finally. He was living.
Concept and main story writing by XXXYYY aka Gary ZZZ. Voice by text to voice.